Okay, everybody. So today's topic, on the heels of the whole Eric Gardner story in New York, is on excessive force by police, and from a Torah Halachic viewpoint, how do we measure that? How do we view that? I'd like to give credit and thank Rabbi Micha Khan, whose article on the internet provided me with a lot of sources and information on this topic. Okay, when we're talking now, this is very different than the Michael Brown case that we dealt with a number of weeks ago in Ferguson, Missouri. Why is this so different than the Michael Brown case?
He wasn't coming at this police officer.
Okay. Right, when we're discussing the Michael Brown case, there the issue, the halachic issue at hand there was that of a rodef. If someone is coming at you and trying to cause you pain, then, or even potentially kill you, as we discussed in the case of a bav machteret, someone coming into your house at night, really to steal, but knowing that you're not going to stand or sit or lie idly with someone breaking into your house, so he knows you might come at him with, right, to take his life, and then he knows he's planning on taking your life. So that was very different. That was a case where, at least according to the information that's presented to the grand jury, he had attacked the officer. And therefore, that was a very different situation than the Eric Gardner case. The Eric Gardner case was that a police chokehold led, and bringing him down onto the ground, led to his death. And by no one's account was Eric Gardner attacking the police officers. Right? By no one's account was he attacking the police officers.
That's because it's on video. Otherwise, they would have said something else. Perhaps. Look, and that's why I think it's an excellent thing that many police forces are now wearing video cameras. I think it's good for them. I think it's good for the law-abiding public, and I think it's good for the non-law-abiding public. I think it's good for everyone involved. Okay? I know when I'm being filmed, I try to keep things clean. No, I mean, you act differently. We all have that ayin roa that Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, the eye that sees, but that we don't sense quite as strongly. Okay. So let's go now. So the issue over here is when a person who is to a certain degree authorized to use force uses too much force, and that leads to a death. How is that viewed through the prism of the Torah? Now,
but who is determining he's using a little bit too much force?
Okay.
It's
okay. Let's see. Right? I'm not going to rule on the Eric Gardner case. I'm going to give us the structure through which we are meant to view such a thing. So the Torah deals with situations of an accidental death. The accidental death which leads to a person needing to go to the Ir Miklat, to the city of refuge. And when we learn through the tractate of Makos, we understand that if it's a complete fluke for which a person is not responsible at all, then he is too good for Gullus. He is too good for the city of refuge. He does not need to go to the city of refuge. If he is too close to being intentional, he is too bad for Gullus. We will not allow him to go to the Ir Miklat. The Ir Miklat is for someone who is shogeg. There's a certain degree of culpability, but it was certainly not intentional, that which happened. Now, the Mishnah in Makos, which we'll soon see, but first turn over the page to the second side We have the pasuk in Devarim, Deuteronomy 19:5, in both Hebrew and English, very top source. V'asher yavot re'ehu vaya'ar. And a man goes with his fellow, at his fellow, in a forest, lachtov eitzim. What was he there to do? He was there to chop down trees. Now the issue here is not logging. That's not the issue, okay? Right? It was perfectly understandable that he went to chop down trees. V'nidche yado bagarzan. Lichrot ha'etz. And his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree. V'nashal habarzel min ha'etz. The simple understanding is the iron flies off of the handle. Umatzah et re'ehu. And it hits his friend. V'met. And his friend died. This is the Torah's description of a classic case of a shogeg. The din is, Hu yanus el achat ha'arim ha'ela v'chai. He will flee to one of those cities, one of those designated refuge cities, v'chai, and he will live. That's where he will live. He will be safe there from any retribution from the Goel Hadam, from the relatives of the person that he accidentally killed. Now, when we're talking, I might sometimes tell a story, or we tell a story. We tell a story in order to illustrate a point and clarify the parameters of a certain point. If over here, if the Torah is telling us that he went to the forest to chop wood, the Torah could have simply said, a person who kills someone else accidentally, he'll run to the city. Why is the Torah going into this story-like mode and telling us he went there to the forest to chop wood? So the Torah Shebal Peh, our understanding is that Hashem explained to Moshe along with this pasuk, and it was passed down to the generations, that the reason this pasuk is being dictated to be written in such a way with the forest and the chopping wood is in order to teach us halachot, the laws and the parameters of when this din will apply. For that we go to the Mishnah. For those who want to follow in English, on the side 2 it's there in English. Those who want to follow me in Hebrew, on side 1, that's where we have it in the Hebrew. We have, of course, the Gemara is in the middle, and the Rashi is on the side column. We're following the arrow that points into the middle part, into what's the Gemara. Actually, that's the middle of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says there, Zarak et ha'even l'chatzeiro. I threw a stone in my courtyard. Vaharag. And there was someone in my courtyard that I killed by throwing the stone there. I certainly did not intend to kill him. I did not know that he was there. I threw a stone in my courtyard. So, am I responsible to go to an ear miklat? Is that considered manslaughter, or is that considered a fluke? The Mishnah says, Im yesh reshut lenizak likanes lisham. If the person who entered there had permission to be there, if he was allowed to be there, gola. David, just come squeeze in next to next. No, just bring a chair and squeeze. Oh, take a chair, yeah, and squeeze in next to. Oh, here's a chair. Good. Right. If there's reshut for him to enter there, gola. If he was allowed to be there, then I had to know that someone might be there. And therefore, that is not a fluke, that is manslaughter and gola. I, the thrower of the rock, will have to go to the city of refuge. V'im lav, but if he had no permission, he had no right to be there, trespassers will be hit with rocks, no, right? But he had no permission to be there, then Eino Gola. I will not be sent to exile. How do we derive this? Shenemar, from the story that the Torah just told in the pasuk that we quoted, Vasher Yavod Re'eo B'yar. He came with his friend to a ya'ar, to a forest. We learn out. Ma haya'ar. What is the status of a ya'ar? Reshut linizok ulimazik likanesham. It's a place where the guy who was chopping the wood, the mazik, the one who caused the damage, and the nizak, the one who got hit by the head of that axe, the one who got killed, the one who got damaged, they're both allowed to be there. Afkol. So too, when will there be an obligation to be exiled, to go to the city of refuge? Kol reshut l'nizuk l'mazik l'kanesham. Wherever it's a place where both of them are sanctioned to be there. Yatza, to exclude chatzer bal habayit. If it's my own yard, my own property, where no one else is allowed to enter, she'ein reshut l'nizak l'kanesh l'sham. Where the nizak, the person who was damaged, who was killed in this case, did not have permission to be there. That's what we can learn out from the forest. What do we learn out from the wood chopping? Abba Shaul Omer. Abba Shaul says, Ma chatavat eitzim reshut. Chopping wood is always a voluntary act. I am never obligated to chop wood. Now you might say, I could think of some cases where I'm obligated to chop wood. For example,
I'm a wood chopper.
if you're a wood chopper, but you're not obligated to chop wood for that. You're right, Chayrifka. If I'm not obligated to chop wood, I could earn my living another way. When might I be obligated for a mitzvah to chop wood?
To bring it for the altar?
Okay, for the altar, or?
Someone else needs it, and somebody always
So, okay, yes, someone else, the altar, someone else needs it, or parents tell you, or
Sustain.
sukkah.
Oh,
I need tzchach. But the Gemara determines that in all of those cases, the Gemara says there's a very simple rule of thumb that determines, is an act a mitzvah, or is it an act that will enable me to perform a mitzvah? Let's take the altar. Let's take sukkah. Let's take someone needs wood. I'm doing a chesed for someone. Let's say I go there and the wood is chopped already. Not chopped. I'm not stealing anybody's wood. The wood, right? It's not attached anymore. Do I have a mitzvah to chop wood for my schach? No. Do I have a mitzvah to chop wood for the altar? Do I have a mitzvah to chop wood for the poor who need firewood? No. I might have a mitzvah to utilize wood, but there's no mitzvah to actually chop. So if I find it chopped, I'm not obligated to go ahead and specifically chop it, then when it's not chopped and I do chop it, my chopping is not a mitzvah, my chopping would be what's called a hechsher mitzvah. But there's no case where the Torah says, thou shalt chop wood. Chopping wood, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say the mitzvah really is to provide.
Correct. So therefore, by using a case of chopping wood, it's letting us know one will only have to go to exile, meaning being held that responsible for what happened, if it happened while one was doing a voluntary act. Abba Sholomer, Machatzavat Eitzim Reshut, Av Kol Reshut. Yatza, and he excludes two cases. Ha'av Hamaka et Beno. He says a father who is physically disciplining a child, which at times is necessary. And for our issue over here, the third case is our issue. Second case is Harav Harod es Talmido, a teacher who's physically disciplining a child. And now for our, which we're not going to get into, that's a whole other issue. And now, Ushliach Beit Din. Okay. We don't have, in the Torah, we have shotrim. We have shoftim v'shotrim. We have judges and we have officers. But we don't hear much about what these officers do. But we do have the Shliach Beit Din. The Shliach Beit Din is the person who is sent, who's acting on behalf of the Beit Din. On behalf of the Beit Din. So we're saying if the person acting on behalf of the Beit Din if he accidentally kills someone while he's acting on behalf of the Beit Din, then he is exempt from Ir Miklat. Now, what is this case of the Shliach Beit Din? So English doesn't have it on the Hebrew. I have the second arrow I underlined. Rashi explains, Ushliach Beit Din, Hamalka Arba'im L'chayev Malkut. Someone who is giving the 40 lashes to someone who is obligated to receive lashes. So this person is giving the Beit Din mandated lashes. Now, before anyone would get lashes, the person would go through a physical, and it would be determined if and how many could a person actually take. There was a mistake. Either there was a mistake in the counting and he over-administered, or there was a mistake in the assessment. Let's go with the case that there was a mistake in administering and he over-administered. We're saying that since he was involved in a mitzvah, he will be exempt from the repercussion of being sent, exiled, to the city of refuge. That is how Rashi learns the Gemara, the Mishnah. Back to side B, the Rambam never wrote, or he wrote a pair of the Mishnayos, he didn't write a parish on the Gemara. He didn't write an explanation on the Gemara as Rashi did. But the Rambam extracted the laws from the Mishnah and from the Gemara. And from the laws that he extracts, we often can discern how he understood the Mishnah or the Gemara. So this we have Rambam, the laws of a murderer, chapter 5, halacha 6. And this we have both in Hebrew and in English. If a teacher strikes a student, O shliach Beit Din, or again the emissary of the Beit Din, shehika et Baal Din, who struck a litigant, hanimna milavo ladin. He was summoned to bring this person to court. This person refused to come to court, and he struck him. Vehemito bishgaga, and he killed him accidentally. Pater migalut, he'll be exempt from going into exile. Shenemar, as it says, as we said, that's our pasuk above, lachatov eitzim, to chop wood. V'divrei hareshut, which is a voluntary act, to exclude those three cases, the father, the Rebbe, and the Shliach Beit Din. Shari shigigu v'hargu bishat asot hamitzvot. There, they erred and overdid it at a time that they were involved in a mitzvah. So we see there's a certain give. There's a certain exemption that if one is involved in physical force that is mandated, that is a mitzvah the one be involved with, then there is a certain slackening, lessening, diminishing, mitigation of the responsibility of unintended consequences. Yes?
It's not clear to me that we can infer from the emissary of the court to the case of the police officer. I see two significant differences. One is that it is a specific court order, and second, that it is against a specific person. The policeman is working not in a more general capacity in both cases.
Okay, and excellent point. And now we're going to go through two different case points in halacha, right? And then, right, I'm by no means saying, therefore, we're finished. Hope you guys had a good lunch. and we see that everyone's good. We're not there yet. You're making valid points, and we're going to touch upon those. Chai Rivka.
I was thinking, when a surgeon, before a surgeon does an operation, he or she makes sure every tool is correct. This wood chopper, did he check his axe? Is he a careless kind of a person?
Okay,
where
so
he
you're
didn't check that
making an
it
excellent
really-
point.
That it really fits?
Right?
It's a dangerous tool.
Right. Now, if he had checked it perfectly, then he probably would not have to go to Gullus, because that would be considered a fluke accident that he had no way of controlling. Right?
Okay.
If he was reckless in it, then that might even be considered murder. So we're talking about a case where he did a basic check, and it seemed to be good. Okay? And we're going to come soon also to a case of a surgeon, a case of a doctor. Yes, Linda.
If we're saying that it's a fluke accident, isn't Hashem...
Who's saying it's a fluke accident?
Well, when we talked about the axe.
No. If it's a fluke accident, he will not have to go to Ir Miklat.
In any case, isn't Hashem in charge of that?
Hashem's in charge of everything.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I could take a sandwich and start pushing into people's faces because, hey, Hashem's in charge. You're supposed to have a sandwich in your face. Right? Right? Hashem's in charge of everything.
Right.
But he weaves our free will and our actions, he weaves that into the tapestry of his will. So the fact that it's God's will does not exonerate anyone. Okay? God weaves our free will into the tapestry of his will. Okay? Classic example, right? Well, we'll have coming up soon. Paro wants to destroy the Redeemer of Israel, so he makes a decree. Every boy gets thrown into the Nile. As a result of it, so God says, okay, that's how you want to go with it, fair enough. Your decree will bring about that the Redeemer of Israel will become the Redeemer of Israel with you, Paro, housing him, you, Paro, feeding him, you, Paro, clothing him, you, Paro, educating him about how to be a leader. So your free will, you want to make such a decree? Fine. That'll be woven into the tapestry of God's will. God's will was that Joseph, the brothers would bow down to Joseph. The brothers used their free will to try to stop that, to sell Joseph as a slave to Egypt. God said, fair enough. That's how you want to do that. We'll weave that into the tapestry of my will, and it's your selling down to Egypt, which will lead to the fulfillment of that which you tried to prevent. Let's go to some actual cases. In 1830, the Chazon Sofer was asked to rule about a tragic incident. Now, for whatever reason, this woman was not going to be indicted by the court system there, and the question was, on a Jewish religious level, how responsible was she?
This was in Israel, right?
I don't think so. No.
No?
This was no, definitely not. This was a tragic incident.
Pressburn.
A young housemaid had fainted, and the woman of the house panicked. She ran to get some whiskey to help revive her, which in the 1830s was proper medical practice, right? Right now we say call 911, then they said get the whiskey, okay?
The girl was...
She fainted.
She was a guest in the house?
No, she was a housemaid, a woman who worked in the house. She fainted. The woman of the house went to get some whiskey to help revive her. In the rush, she took a bottle of petroleum instead of the whiskey. Personally, I can't tell the difference. That's another story. Okay? Right? And thinking it was whiskey, she poured it into the mouth of the housemaid and killed her. Okay? Now, she turned to the Chasam Sofer to instruct her what sort of atonement would she need. So again, I'm not sure what was going on with the authorities there. But she came to the Chasam Sofer with what sort of teshuvah does she need to do. The Chasam Sofer in his teshuvah cites the Mishnah that we just learned as his primary source. And he says, according to the opinion of Rashi, that it was the Beit Din Shliach who was administering the lashes. And the Ravid, who's one of those who often argue on the Rambam, said the same thing. So he says, if the person gave too many lashes, why should he be exempt from punishment? He was only legislated by the court to serve as their agent to give 15 lashes. If he, whatever it was. If he, maximally 39. Any multiple of 3 until that based on what the person is able to handle. If he overdid it and gave an extra one, why is he exempt? So he says he must have gotten confused with the number and thought he had not yet given the proper amount when he already had. So even though the actual hit that killed this person tragically was not a mitzvah, since he started off as doing a mitzvah that was sanctioned by the Beit Din, he still has this dispensation. So the Chasam Sofer understands, since you started off doing a mitzvah, then, well, it wasn't to save a life, right? You started off doing
The lady was trying to save a life.
So since this person, the Shliach Beit Din, started off doing a mitzvah, even though he then erred, he has this dispensation. So too, the Chasam Sofer said, since this woman started off doing a mitzvah with the proper accepted procedure to do if someone has fainted, to give them some whiskey, so then even though it ended up with a tragic mistake, that same dispensation will apply. So when she ran to get the whiskey, she was involved in a mitzvah. She's like the Shliach Beit Din. Right? Now she could have been more careful. So too the Shliach Beit Din could have been more careful to have not given that extra lash. Therefore he said she's not considered responsible for the death, but she should do some teshuvah if this terrible mishap came about through her. So she does need to do some teshuvah. So that was a responsa, teshuvah, back in the year 1830. More contemporarily, Rav Shmuel Vosner had a case. A shiloh was presented to him about dental malpractice. Okay, now, if a doctor is operating and something goes wrong, the doctor is not, well, I don't know, by the Torah's laws, the doctor is not, it will not be held personally liable. Now, by American law, we have very, very high malpractice premiums that are paid just for this. But by Torah law, the person is not going to be held liable. The case over here was that a dentist drilled the wrong tooth. There he ruled that the dentist was obligated to pay. And he differentiated between a case where I've started surgery properly and something went wrong, where in this case, right, if a person damages in the actual course of treatment, but drilling the wrong tooth, that's not the course of treatment, Rav Vosner ruled. There was no treatment that was meant to be started on that one tooth. Perhaps it would be different if you're drilling the tooth that needs to be drilled and you over-drill. That is something where you started off properly and then you went beyond. But drilling the wrong tooth, he said, is not considered the course of treatment, and he has the same responsibility as a layman. From these sources, it seems an agent of the Beit Din, a doctor, a dentist, a law enforcement official that causes damage or death in the course of doing his legitimate duties may not be held liable, as long as the initial action that led to the harm was justified. In the case of the Chasam Sofer, the lady of the house, her initial action was justified. Whiskey is a legitimate way, at least it was in 1830, it was considered to be a legitimate way of reviving someone who had fainted. Now, if nowadays, where it's clear that that's not what you should do, you should call 911, you should call a doctor. Nowadays, we would say there was no legitimate beginning that went awry, and we would say that she should be held responsible. In Rav Vosner's case, the dentist never should have started on that tooth. So he's not considered that he had a legitimate initial action which then went awry. But like we said before, if while he was working on the proper tooth he drilled too deep, then it would seem he had a legitimate beginning and it went awry, and he would be held and he would not be held accountable. Now let's try to apply this to the law enforcement, then we'll take any questions. Like the Shliach Beit Din, like the emissary of the Beit Din, the law enforcement officials should have a favorable halachic status if they unintentionally caused death, if they were following the proper procedures. Meaning, and I don't know the details of that case, I imagine that's what's being debated. If physical force was, according to the proper protocols and procedures, if physical force was what was called for in that situation, so if an officer is using an appropriate form of force, even if he could have been more careful, and then things went awry, then it would seem that according to the halacha, the officer would have this dispensation of not chopping wood, of it not being a voluntary act, it being an obligatory act that he had to be involved with, and things went awry, we have then the dispensation. But if that was a situation which did not call for physical force to be used, in that case, he's drilling the wrong tooth. In that case, there was never an allowance for physical force. He loses this dispensation and is fully responsible for an inadvertent homicide. So the question, which I don't know if anyone knows all the facts, or I don't know the facts for sure over there. The question is, in that case, did proper police protocol call for physical action to bring down this man? If proper protocol called for that, and this tragic result occurred, then he would have this halachic dispensation of the shliach beit din, of the non-wood chopper, of one who's involved in an obligatory act. If proper protocol did not call for force or for bringing the man down to the ground, then this person was acting, this police officer was acting on his own without the sanction of this shliach beit din, and therefore he would be held responsible. Art, did I address what you wanted to say?
No.
Okay.
I don't see the relevance of the dentist anecdote, because in the case of the dentist, the victim, the patient, lived, if I understand correctly. So I understand damages, I understand that he would need to be compensated for pain and suffering. But there's no death, there's no issue of going to a city of refuge.
Yes. The issue is culpability. Now, granted, in different situations, there'll be different degrees of culpability. If it's a monetary damage and pain, then it's a monetary compensation, culpability that's being discussed. If there is manslaughter, then it's a question of ir miklat. Right? Granted, different cases will have different degrees of culpability, but the issue at hand, which is running consistent, is the person held responsible or not? And that is a common thread, whether it's a case which led to death, is the person held responsible for murder, a case which led to damages and pain, is the person responsible for the monetary compensation for the damages and pain. Right? It's really irrelevant what the result is. The question is there culpability or is there a dispensation?
I would have thought it would be very relevant, but that's why I'm not a lawyer.
You know, it makes all the sense to me.
Joel.
Last week we talked that, like, for instance, if someone was attacking you, we had a responsibility to stop that person attacking you. So in this situation where there's a group, say, of officers of the court or police officers, and one of them acts out where he's using excessive force, so to say, do the other people, according to Torah, have an obligation to...
That's very interesting. That's very interesting, right? And I think that'll be more of a question about other officers as opposed to citizens, right? Because if we jump in there, it's not going to be pretty. And we can't jump in there because we don't know. We don't know what the proper procedures are. We don't know what the protocols are. We don't know the background of the case, right? But for other police officers, that's interesting. And I would imagine if a police officer sees another police officer who is clearly going beyond, right? Or even if, well, I don't know, it's hard to say. I'm thinking back to Rodney King, right? On one hand, you see them, beating the daylights out of this guy, right? But then I think they said this guy was high on who knows what, which turns a person into this
UCP.
Yeah, whatever it is, So I would say for us, right, we would have to err on the side of don't get involved and assume the police who are trained, uniformed, they know what they're doing. For another police officer, right, who's privy to the same information that this officer has and sees something that is really wrong, then I believe that officer does have the obligation to jump in. I think the Jewish the Torah obligation, the moral obligation, and I would imagine also the legal by police protocol and standards obligation also to jump in. That's what's in. Yes, Chai Rivka.
I just finished a book, and one of the chapters was about the police. And they observed when two or more policemen go out on a job, there's always much more bravado, and there's much more a possibility of a shooting. Because one wants to show he's a brave policeman. So,
Wait, I'm saying there's more shooting by two or by one?
Two.
When there's two, because I want to show the other guy.
One policeman, one of them will want to be tougher.
Uh-huh.
So that's what one of the things that we're talking about is that.
This is a novel.
It's a sociological book.
Okay. This based on studies.
Studies, all based on studies. There were a lot of police studies, and it's a very fine book. And what it said is the police often, what they're changing in many cities. They used to think you should go out in teams of 2, but they found that teams of one is much safer because then you're a little fearful, you're more cautious, and chances of shooting and damages, death are less. And whenever they have all these cases, it's always more than one policeman.
Interesting. David?
I have a number of questions, but I'm just going to ask this one. From the Torah perspective, how are we to view somebody who falls into the case of the one that Chasam Sofer decided, namely that woman? And how are we to view someone who falls in the case of the dentist? There was a law judges them, but we're off to the side. We're not involved. How are we to look at them?
At the dentist?
Yeah. Here's a guy.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the question is. Would I choose him for my dentist? I'd probably go to Denver and use my brother.
How would you think about him from the Torah perspective, given this law? In other words, he drilled on the wrong tooth. I mean, is he just an unlucky guy, or
look?
is he a little sloppy?
Look, people make mistakes. We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. This was an unfortunate mistake. You know. I don't know. I don't know. We're talking from a halachic aspect of culpability.
Mm-hmm.
He's responsible to pay.
Okay.
Right? Does this mean he's a complete shlamazel? Right? And you shouldn't trust your smile with him? I don't know.
If you're a real Torah Jew, then how do you look at a person like that?
Say it again?
If you're a real Torah Jew, then how do you think of a person?
Here's a person who made a mistake, and he asked a shaila, and he was told that he has to pay, and he has to pay. He's a good Jew. How good a dentist is he? I would do a little further to see how often this happens.
Uh-huh.
Right? This happens once. This happened once in his 40-year career. Then I think it happens. Such a thing will happen to everyone once in their career. If this is a weekly occurrence, then I trust my smile elsewhere.
Okay, but we don't think of him as a bad person.
No, I don't think so. Look, anyway, we all make mistakes. If we cause damage and we accept it and we pay, then we're a good God-fearing Jew. Your Honor.
All I was going to say was that we're responsible in civil law and in Jewish law for all the damages we caused to another human being.
Right.
Whether it was intentional
Right.
or accidental.
Yeah.
When you
Right.
smash into somebody's car by accident, you just don't say, I'm sorry, and walk away. You have to fix the car.
Right. The Gemara has a term, Adam muad la'olam. That when it comes to an ox, we have a shur tam, an ox that's a non-goring animal, and a goring animal. I only have to pay damage, full damage, if it's your goring animal that did it. Right? But an Adam, a human being, as a muad, is considered, tried and tested, is always fully responsible. We need to be we're fully responsible for our actions, if damage is caused, but I didn't mean it, okay. So you're a very good person, but you got to compensate me. Yes, Lindy, you want to say something?
No, I was.
Okay, we'll take Ken and then we'll bench. Yes.
Okay, I'm wondering if the situation with Eric Gardner can be considered as the police stopping a rodef. They are shliach habetin. Eric Gardner was arrested 31 times prior to this incident.
But
How they know that?
at that time, what was he? He was not a rodef. What was he doing?
Well, the shopkeepers who had the businesses before where he was located had called him in evidently or had summoned the police before. And this is a person who, by the number of times he's been charged and with this same crime.
But what was he doing? What was he doing?
He was selling cigarettes.
He was selling the cigarettes
Selling cigarettes
in an area
illegally.
that he was illegally.
Okay,
But
that's not a rodef. A rodef is someone's trying to cause death to someone.
Cigarettes?
He was-
is it
he
always
was-
death? Because
he was
can
breaking-
can it be considered a commercial pursuant because he is
So
he has,
for that,
he set up his
there's a
business-
financial liability, right? Right. If someone's trying to kill you, right, you're allowed to kill him first. If someone's trying to sell cigarettes at a price cheaper than you're able to sell it, right, because you're selling it within the context of the law, and he's selling it out of the context of the law, he's not a rodef. I can't kill him.
Okay.
Regardless of how many
not
times he's been arrested in the
apart
past.
From okay, I was just wondering about the initiating incident that would call the police into this situation in the beginning. As far as causing his death, I don't believe the officer who used the so-called chokehold was responsible for his death. I counted the time that he had his arm around the neck. It was 10 seconds, plus or minus 1 second. And then it was released. Then his head was on the ground. He's also an asthmatic. So my thinking is, 10 seconds around the neck is not sufficient time to choke to death anybody. I mean, unless
Yes,
you have...
but a person has a certain
attack.
condition, I would imagine, I'm not a doctor. I imagine, unless a person has a certain condition, that's enough to set a series of events going, which could lead to his death.
Can I ask one last question?
Yes.
What do you think, how responsible a person of power who, knowing that the decision of the court that was made, how can I say that, instigates violence or opposition to this decision, which results in violence and property damage and everything?
That is a crime
And is
by
it
social
financially
standards and by
ultimately for all the
how the heavens will hold someone responsible. I think a person is responsible if a person is stirring up violence, right? I think both the Brown family and the Gardner family both spoke out against violence, and I think a lot of the violence that result are by professional
hoodlums.
Anarchists and the like who are drawn to such things. Okay, we're not going to sing Shir HaMalos today, so we're just going to have bench.
All this violence started with his approval and instigation.
I say it anyway.
Okay, thank you, Beth.
That'd be good.
Okay.